thinking about this last week because I heard someone else talking about it and kind of questioning the same thing. And in just my humble opinion here, I don't think that it's either or. Like, I see a lot of people talking about it in, is it bad to use social media? Is it worthless? Is it worth it? And I just don't think it's an either or. I think that it is inevitable as a part of being a part of life, regardless of what you're using it for. It is a tool that is just a part of our lives. The internet in general and social media are now ubiquitous in our culture, to our jobs, event planning, to social gatherings, to organizing, to anything and everything, and there is literally no way to avoid that. People utilize social media for everything in their lives. Or when we're talking about change, it's just about looking at what people's strengths and weaknesses are. Like, some people are better at speaking. Some people are better at educating. Some people are better at organizing groups. Some people are better at event planning. Some people are better at finances. Some people are really good at hacking, okay? And I'm not saying that a part of any major change you would need somebody with those kind of computer skills. I'm just saying that's something that people have. And I get what you mean about saying, like, okay, well, maybe it's just a release valve. The Democratic Party was supposed to be that, right? Sure, maybe in some ways it is, but it's also been used to do things like organizing the GameStop thing that happened a couple years ago. One of the best things about what happened with that GameStop thing, which was all organized online and through Reddit, was that it not only exposed how fraudulent our entire system is, but it showed what they actually care about. And that's the thing. It's not about in real life versus online organizing or education. It's about, what are you targeting, right? All these people care about is money. So in order to get them to pay attention like they did at GameStop, you need people organizing like they did around GameStop. Where are you guys? That's what I want to know. Where are the really smart internet people who know how to do shit like that? Where are you guys at? Social media is also great, in fact, for things like fundraising that people would never otherwise be able to do. And it's also great for organizing events and people and strategies in ways that would be very difficult to do if you didn't have this technology. I do think that it matters a lot for education, for spreading information, and for changing people's minds and teaching people about things that they otherwise wouldn't know, for getting people to understand why it is that things are so messed up and putting those things together. My whole thing is trying to get other Americans who are super uneducated about what's happening in the world, because Americans are selfish as fuck and we don't think about anything outside of our own bubble or our country. And yet what you saw with the United Healthcare CEO, the response to that was a bunch of Americans literally on the same page. They're so angry, but they don't know who to direct that anger at, and they oftentimes don't even know who the person screwing them is. And it's important to get those two things connected. The thing that's so frustrating, I think, or can be to a lot of people, is that this kind of thing takes a very long time. It takes years to like build and actually see the fruits of, and the elites might start nuclear war before then, who knows? But changing people's minds is critical. And I know I'm just one person and this is just a personal anecdote, but it is because of social media and because of what I saw coming out of Gaza and people like Salma educating me on what was happening there and what the history was there, that got me on the path to completely changing my worldview. Like, I am just a random fucking American, okay, who was fully propagandized by the American government when it came to the Israeli regime and believed all the bullshit in the Hasbara that they've been putting out for decades, okay? Had October 7th happened before the era of social media access that we have now, there is no doubt in my mind that I would have believed everything they said. And I would have, because A, there would have been no counter narrative and no voices speaking about what the truth actually was. And B, if you're an American, you are already predisposed to believing the propaganda about the Israeli regime because you were taught that from birth. If social media was not an incredibly powerful tool in order to spread information and change people's minds, which is the prerequisite for anything else, you cannot engage in any type of change without first changing what is happening here. And if it wasn't a powerful tool, then A, you wouldn't have Facebook fighting so hard and Meta fighting so hard to try to constantly silence and censor people. You wouldn't have had Congress run to ban TikTok because they were so upset about the fact that people were getting information from there, especially about Palestine. Because you guys remember that call that leaked from Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL, where he was on a call and he was freaking out about the age divide, how it wasn't like a Democrat versus Republican thing when it came to how people view the Israeli regime. It was people who were younger, and that was because of social media and TikTok, and he was crying over it. The reason why he was whining like a bitch on that call is because he understands the power of social media. If the Israeli regime did not understand the power of social media, they would not spend millions and millions and millions of dollars in order to influence it. They, in 2023 and 2024 alone, they started like 3 or 4 new companies in order to influence social media. They spend millions and millions of dollars, not just on bot farms, not just on paying influencers, but on the technology that they want to use to crawl social media sites in order to find people to target with their propaganda. And it took them a long time to do this. This is a mission that they have been on, that they have been investing in their Hasbara since the 80s. But it just now is on social media because that's where everyone else is. Watch this video talking about it from way before social media.
Israel launched the Hasbara project, the aim of which was to ensure good press in the U.S. media. The goal was to train Israeli diplomats in communications and public relations. For example, they trained press officers in Israeli consulates in the U.S. to ensure that American journalists would write stories favorable to Israel. As one of these press officers said in the 1980s, he had breakfast, lunch, and dinner with journalists, and that a typical day would involve conversations with producers at leading news and TV talk shows about the content of the program. He described it as, in fact, quote, a joint formulation of ideas. This targeting of the American media goes on in the present day.
The Israeli press office is spitting out press releases, statements, information all the time. So you could sit in a bureau in Jerusalem and file stories from there all the time without really having to have much imagination or have much energy or have much drive. Palestine Authority press office is almost useless, and they certainly aren't providing you with ready-made stories the way the Israeli press office is.
Because of the lack of access to Palestinian officials in the West Bank and the sophistication of Israel's PR techniques inside Israel, a lot of times the stories are already tilted in Israel's favor before they ever leave American journalists sitting in Korea.
When you're talking about how the story is covered from the U.S., the propaganda machine is even more effective than it is in Israel. American news coverage is influenced by a complex set of institutional relationships. These influences can be thought of as a series of filters through which the news must travel before it emerges in the voices of news anchors. To understand how American news media report on the Middle East conflict, we need to understand how these institutional filters operate. Among the most important of these filters are the business interests of the corporations that own the mass media, interests that extend beyond the United States and across the globe to the Middle East. The economic interests of media owners are shared by political elites, politicians, and policymakers who form a second filter. These political elites have the power to access and influence mainstream media and are themselves part of a system dominated by corporate money and interests. The strategic importance of the Middle East to these two groups is reflected in media coverage of the region and of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. A third filter, Israel's own public relations efforts, further affects the coverage. The government of Israel employs some of the largest American public relations firms as image consultants to coordinate its political and media campaigns. 9 Israeli consulates help implement these PR campaigns by developing relationships with journalists and monitoring media outlets. Scores of private American organizations, both Christian and Jewish, reiterate the official line and organize grassroots opposition to any coverage deemed unfavorable to Israel. The most important of these is AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, widely regarded as the most powerful foreign lobby in Washington. This institutional framework of American business and political interests in combination with Israeli public relations shapes media coverage of the Middle East. At At the same time, those progressive organizations opposing Israeli government policy, such as Jews Against the Occupation and Americans for Peace Now, rarely make it through these filters. Finally, if any news stories critical of Israeli policy do surface, there are a host of media watchdog groups that monitor and pressure journalists and media outlets, the most important of which is Camera. You have activist organizations from the right, the pro-Israeli right, that very effectively, they say monitor, I would say harass journalists and their editors, and try to make sure that the coverage is objective, by which they mean pro-Israel. You can see all of the kind of pressure groups who write campaigns, letters to the editor against news outlets and ask for demand that stories be changed or that that reporters be fired.
It's incredibly important in getting people to open the door and get to that first step. The kind of content that people like Salma make in order to educate people and get them to look into it further. Because here's the thing, most Americans are not, when people are like, especially on the left, oh well, they've just got to read Marxist theory or they've just got to get educated. Most Americans can't read past the 5th grade level, okay? And even the Americans who can, they often are never told, because they don't go to school or they don't go to college, about any of these books. So you're not going to hear about them unless somebody gives you entrance into that world. It's like, I am somebody who has lived in America my whole life, never been outside of the country, not cultured, not educated, didn't go to college. And so the idea that I was just going to go start looking for these books about history was super unlikely. In order to make it accessible to poor people, to the masses, to the proletariat, you need to have people open that door for them and give them that accessibility so that they can start inquiring further, which is exactly what I did. I have now read like 11 books on Palestine. Books that I would have never read, though, had I first not been told by people who made it first accessible to me, the information. I don't have a handler like Joe Biden does to pick up the 100 Years War on Palestine and tell him to pretend to read it. So, it was regular people on social media who told me about these books, who told me about these authors. In the same way that video showed the different levels that information goes through in Western media before it is filtered down to the general public to propagandize us, it is the same way when it comes to trying to educate people into the truth. In order to change people's actions, you first have to change people's minds and educate them and persuade them. And the way you do that, especially to an uneducated population like the United States, or anyone around the world for that matter, is to lower the barrier to entry, to make it so that somebody doesn't have to have a college degree in order to understand these truths. And you do that by educating people and speaking to them and connecting the dots for them on the things that need to be connected in order to make any kind of change. And it's regular people that do that. I am just one person, but everyone is just one person until we're a mob. And I can tell you, I was on the train to being further propagandized by the Israeli regime after October 7th happened, but for regular people getting online and sharing with me what the truth was. People like Salma. And it was because of people like her and other creators and other people online who were sharing information in an accessible way that made it so that I could start learning more, because then you hand it off to them for them to educate themselves further and learn more. But it always has to start somewhere, and social media is an invaluable tool for that starting process. The Israeli regime has literally taken random fucking people on TikTok and turned them into millionaires because they are paying them so much money to get on here and do propaganda for them. They don't just give away money like that and trips for free. They're not doing that shit unless they feel they're going to get some return on their investment. And the thing is, when it comes to lies that you want to break down and tell the truth about and expose, something like the Israeli regime specifically, but not just that, many lies surrounding empires throughout history, including the American Empire, are not done overnight. It takes years to craft these narratives. It has taken decades and decades and decades to build up this mirage around the Israeli regime. But when it comes to information spreading, it can take decades, but decades can also happen in weeks. So to me, I don't think it's an option to engage or not engage when it comes to the internet and social media. It is what it is. The internet and social media are real life. They are integrated in every part of our life. So it's not a matter of using it or not using it. It's a matter of how we use it. But we must use it, because to not use it in various ways, and it can be used in various ways, not just one or two, is to cede to the people who are already in power, who are definitely going to be using it for their evil purposes, and who do use it for their evil purposes now. Bro, that shit was in the 80s and 90s, okay? So that was before social media. That was before the heavy influence of the ADL on social media. And they didn't even mention Kufi or whatever the fuck. The point is, whether it's media from the 90s or the 80s, or whether it's media in the form of social media now, what that clip illustrates is the incredible power of propaganda and information sharing, and how they use the media in various forms to propagandize the general public, because the media is the conduit. If anything, I feel like people in general often downplay the importance of the media, how critical the media is when it comes to information sharing and propaganda and spreading the truth or spreading lies. I feel like oftentimes, especially activists, downplay the importance of media, the critical role that media plays. When things like what Edward Snowden did, where he leaked that information to The Intercept about Americans being spied on by our government, the thing he did that was so critical was share the information with the media. Same with Julian Assange. When he wanted to get those WikiLeaks out, what did he do? He gave it to the media. If media in all forms, online media, social media, any kind of digital media, cable media, if media in general, print media, if media in all forms were not incredibly vital to anything when it comes to change, to anything in general, they wouldn't spend so much money on it. They would not spend so much money on it, because the only thing these people care more about than oppressing people is money. BDS has been around for a long time, but so many people had no idea what it was. So many people had no idea what they were doing. And yet, when BDS said to boycott McDonald's, look at how much money these motherfuckers have lost, okay? How was that organized? How was that organized? It was information and truth spreading on the internet, on social media. So I think it's incredibly important for everybody to use their voice, especially since the people on the other side have the money, okay? They've got the money. So since the people telling the truth and on the right side don't often have the money, then we all have to collectively work together to use our voices. Unless you're somebody who happens to be on the right side and you have money, where are you at? If you are someone who's not a sociopath and you actually believe in the right things and you happen to have money, come to the front, because you should be investing that into media and people that are telling the truth.